We're on the bottom of Daf Vav Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Hanubei trade to have a diary. There were two people that were living together. Rashi says it was two brothers who had a divided, um, the Yerusha of a house. Chad have a diary loy, Chad have a diary taitoy. One was living on top, on the second story, and one was living on the first story. It bar tatoy, and the bottom part of the house started to sink into the ground. So it means the roof was going down. The walls and the roof were going sinking into the ground. Amle tatoili loy, Tavin of Naya. The guy on the bottom said, "Let's go rebuild the house because my ceiling is sinking, and I don't have that much room to stand up straight." Amle anashapa to kadeirna. This is a typical brothers. The other one said to him, "I'm fine. I'm moving upstairs. I don't mind that my house is lowering down. It's all good to me. You're the one who has a problem." Amalei Istaria Ana Vivnaya. It almost sounds like Kamsa by Kamsa. So the guy says, so the one who was on bottom said, "You know what? I'll knock down the house and rebuild it. So you'll have your house. Don't worry about it." Amalei Li Amalesli Duchte Lemedeba. The one on top said, "I'm not willing to have you knock down and rebuild the whole house, even though I'll still have my full apartment, because then I won't have a place to live while it's being rebuilt during the renovations." He said, "I'll rent for you an apartment in the meantime." He said, "I don't want to have to move out while everything is being rebuilt." Loika, Bays, what's the bays? Amalei Loika Misteli. So the one on the bottom said, "I don't have where to live. This is not working. I mean, my head, the roof is coming down onto my head." So he said to him, he said, what's your problem? Your problem is that every time you go through the door hits you on the head. Go crawl on your stomach to go in and crawl on your stomach to go out. Really very unconcerned about his fellow's situation. Amar of Chana, Amar of Chama, Bedina Kamakiv. Chama said he's being Ma'akiv and Bedin. From the sound of Rav Chama, it sounds like Bedina, the din is on your side, but you're not. Doesn't sound like he looked up to him as the paragon of virtue and morality. He said, "Yeah, the din is on your side, but you're not really doing the right thing." This is true that the one on bottom, the one person in the bottom story, doesn't have a legal taina. It's only that the ceiling hasn't gone below 10 tvachim. Once the ceiling goes below 10 tvachim, but if it goes down, that the house sunk down enough that the ceiling of the first floor is below 10 tvachim, at that point, you could say, "You're now infringing on my personal space. I'm entitled to at least 10 tvachim to live in, and now your floor, which is my ceiling, is within my personal living area, and therefore I can force you to redo the house." So now it sounds like an awfully one-sided din. But if you think about it, I know from my house that every house settles. There is such a thing. If you, right, every year, by me, like everything tilts toward the inside of the house where the main beam is. It's a normal thing for a house to go down a couple of inches. So we're just saying what the shear is of how much settling is allowed before the person on bottom can force the person on top to redo the house. So this is all as long as they didn't make a t'nai when they first divided up the house. But if they did make a t'nai, then they have to knock it down and rebuild. What's a shear? We said the shear is if there was no t'nai. That means if the house sunk to where the person on bottom only has 10 tefachim. What's the shear where they did make it tonight? Where they said, where the person on bottom said, "I'm only taking the bottom al tonight that we redo it if the house sinks." Am Rabbanan Kamed Rabba, Mishmei de Marzutra Brei de Rav Nachman, the Amma Mishmei de Rav Nachman. The height of an apartment, of a house, is normally the sum of half of the length and half of the width. Take half of the length and half of the width, you add it together, and that's the typical height of a house. Right? If a house is not a square, as the house is 20 feet long by 10 feet wide, so you take half of 20 is 10, and half of 10 is 5. So you say the height has to be 15 feet. Amalu Rabba, Lava Minil Chule, Tislu Buki Shriki B'Rav Nachman. He said to him, well, you're saying don't hang your empty vessels in Rav Nachman. Saying you have an idea, you have this concept of how to measure the size of a house. Don't blame it on Rav Nachman. What you're saying doesn't really make sense. Because obviously, if it's dependent on the width and the length of the house, you could have a very high ceiling. You could have the house is 40 feet by 20 feet. Then you're talking about a 30-foot high ceiling, which is incredibly high. So it shouldn't be it shouldn't be a relative amount. It should be an absolute amount. Hachi Amar Rav Nachman. So this is what Rav Nachman really said. Ki the diary inchi. The height, if they made it tonight, it has to be the amount that a person normally lives in. The comma, and how much is that? I'm Rav Breda of Yeshua. As long as you can bring in a bundle of ropes that they used to carry in mechuzah, you can bring it into the house and move around with it without banging into the ceiling. Whatever that amount is. Maybe it's 6 feet, maybe it's 8 feet. There was a person who was building a wall opposite the window of his friend. Now this is, I think, probably one of the most common type of dinei Torah that happens. A person was building a wall opposite the window of his friend, and he's blocking his light. This happens daily. I'm sure any bezdin you'll go to says that this happens, that someone's making an extension, and the person who's next to him says you're blocking my sunlight. I don't want you to build the extension. Now we have to clarify. We said before hezekri is like loishme hezek, but over here, as Rashi will explain later on, over here we're talking about where the person had a chazaka. If you have already for 3 years that you have a window that's letting in light, another person cannot go ahead and build a wall that blocks your light. Once you have a chazaka of that light, you can't build and take it away. So Amalei kamavlis alai. He said, you're taking away my light. Amalei sakarnalach hacha vavinalach kavi koi leel mashisai. So the person who was building the new wall said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll close up your window. Your window is 4 feet off the ground, and I'm building a 6-foot wall. So I'll close up your window 4 feet high, and I'll build you a new window that's 7 feet up in the wall. So it'll be higher than the level of my wall. He said, I don't want you to plug up my window and make a new hole in a new window. When you bang a new window in a wall, it weakens the wall. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll knock down the wall up to the height of the window. He says, rather than banging a hole at 7 feet in the wall above the level of the wall, I'll knock down the wall down to 7 feet, and then I'll rebuild the whole wall and build a window in it. That way, I won't be weakening the wall by punching a hole into an existing wall. I'll rebuild the wall from the level of that window. Amalei, Ashisa mitatoy atiko umilel chadtoloikaim. So the person whose window was being blocked said, I'm not interested in that, because then you'll have half of an old wall and half of a new wall, and such a wall doesn't stand well. Amalei, so he said to him, I'll knock it down all the way to the ground, then I'll rebuild it. I'll make the window in this brand new wall. He says you have even one old wall, one new wall, together with the three other old walls. That also is not as strong. Said I'll rebuild your entire house just to make sure, just so I can make my extension. I'll rebuild your whole house with a window above the level of the wall. He said, I don't have where to live while you're building. I'll rent you a house in the meantime. He said, I'm not interested in the schlepping of packing up my stuff and moving. Chama said again, this is the din is on his side. He can be stubborn. He could be a kamsa and a bar kamsa type of person. This is very similar to the story we had before, where the ceiling was sinking into the ground and the person on the top floor refused to move out, refused to go along with any kind of plan to allow it to work. In fact, why do you have to have the same? Why do we have to bring the Shem of Chama? That someone who has the halacha on his side can come up with increasingly strange excuses about why he's not willing to go along with anything. Hakamash Malon, the Af Agav, Dolai Mishtalmish, Ella Tivnu Beit Sivi Ba'alma, even if the house is only used for storage of straw and other materials, even so, the person can claim, I don't want to move out. So we wanted to say two cases. It's interesting. I actually once try to do an extension, and my neighbor would not go along with anything that I wanted. He wouldn't let me use let the workers go into his drive. He wouldn't let me have things hanging into his bushes, and it was just because he didn't want me to extend. So this Gemara sounds crazy. Like, who would do such a thing? I literally had this happen to me. People get very jealous when you do an extension, and everything bothers them. Hanu Beitrei Achi, the Palgi Bahadi Adadi. There were two brothers that were dividing up a Yerusha. Chad Matya Aspalida. One got the mansion that the father lived in. Chad Matya Tarbitza. And the other one got the garden next to the mansion. The Rishonim explain, as going to become evident from the Gemara later on, that obviously the one who got the garden also got some cash on the side as well. The Asplida was the main monetary value. Azlahu the Matya Tarbitza, the one who got the garden, obviously now he got jealous. He went and built a wall that was blocking the light of the mansion. Amalei, light. The one who owned the mansion said, you're blocking my light. You're darkening it. Amalei b'dika b'nyana. He said, I am building within my own property. Amar Rav Chana b'dinka amalei. Rav Chana said, the din is on his side. Now, this is the opposite of what we've been saying till now. Till now, we've been saying that the one whose light is being blocked, the din is on his side. And now we're saying that the din is on the side of the one who's blocking. So Rashi explains that the difference in the previous cases, like we said, is because the person had a chazaka of 3 years, that he was already living with his window getting light inside of it, and now the other person is coming to block it. But over here, they had just made the division of the properties, so he didn't have a chazaka of using it with the light. Two brothers that divided up. One of them took a field with a vineyard, and the other one took a regular field with tvua. The person who has the vineyard is entitled to an easement to use 4 amas of the tvua, of the sada with tvua in it, with grain in it. Because typically, when a person has a vineyard, he has to turn around when he gets to the end of the row. He needs 4 amas to work with to be able to deal with his vineyard. Why? So why is he entitled to that? So Rashi explains, like we said by the Aspladja, by the mansion, since a kerem is more valuable than a sada, just like a mansion is more valuable than a garden, the person who's getting the more valuable thing pays the other one. He gives the other one cash to make up for the difference. So we say together with that cash, he purchased not only the right to get the better thing, but also together with all full uses that are necessary. So in the case of a mansion, he was saying, I paid also for the right to keep the light coming in, and you can't build a wall. And by the case of a Karen, he paid also to have the ability to have Dalit Amas that he could use to turn around in when he's taking care of his property. Amalei Hasam Amalei Hasam the Alul Adadi. He said, how could you compare the cases? Over there by the Kerem, he paid him additionally for the right to get the Kerem, and therefore that he included within the right to take an extra Dalit Amas. So he said back in what are you saying by the mansion? He didn't pay him extra to get the mansion, but he beshufted the askin and the high shackle asplaja, the high shackle tabitza, that the guy who took a garden was an idiot, and he said, "I'll take half and half. You get the mansion, and I get the garden without paying anything in addition." Obviously, there was a payment made here also. um, all he paid him for when he paid extra for the mansion was for the actual physical mansion. But this is a more tangential, it's not as intrinsic to the use of the mansion. So that was not included. He didn't have that in mind when he made a compensatory payment for getting a better chelik of the father's Jerusalem. So the marvel kara asplida palgasli hashta mashusli idruno. The Gemara should say, but if you're gonna, the person who owns the mansion should say to the one who's building the wall, the brother who's building the wall, we agreed that I'm going to get a mansion, but now it's no longer a mansion. Now it's a dark room because by blocking it, the whole point of a geschmacka mansion is that it's light. Every interior decorator will tell you how important light is. It's no longer a fancy mansion. Amr of Simi Barashi, Shema ba'alma poligle. He said, no, the fact that it's no longer a light-filled mansion doesn't change the fact that that's what you took. Because like we said, we have this Gemara back in Bava Metzia. When a person buys a property, if its name, let's say its name is, it's called the vineyard, even though it doesn't actually have any vines in it. But if that's the name that it's called, if it's called the vineyard, and you say, I'm selling you the vineyard, that's what you get. It does. So you can have a name that doesn't reflect the reality of what you're purchasing. And so to over here, even though it was called an asplagia, and asplagia, it means a mansion that normally includes light. That could be just its name. It doesn't mean that that defines what you're entitled to. Mila Tanya, where do we see this? We saw this in a brisa. I'm a base core offer. I'm selling you a sada of a base core. Even though it's only a half of a base core. Higil. It's still considered a good sale. Its name was base core. The Huda Miskri base core, as long as it's called a base core, it doesn't make a difference if it actually has that measure. Or if someone sold a orchard, which normally would include normally means orchard of pomegranates. If it doesn't have any pomegranates, it's still a good sale. But who the mystery paradise, as long as that's what people call it, even though it doesn't actually have pomegranates. He said, I'm selling to you a vineyard, even though it doesn't have any grapes in it. It's still a good sale. Who the mystery karma, as long as it's called a vineyard, it's a good sale. How could you compare the two things? In that case, the seller can tell the purchaser, what I sold you, I told you I'm selling you the vineyard, and this is called the vineyard. Over here, when the two brothers are dividing up, the brother who's taking the mansion, the asplaja, can say it's not just a matter of that what we call it. It's called an aspladia. I also our father lived in this property. It's true I don't have 3 years of using it with light, but our father used it with light. So my intention was to take what my father had, and now you're changing the circumstances. So Gemara, Amalei Mar Yenuka Makashisha Breder of Chizdal Ravashi, Nardoi Latamayu. The Nardoi, meaning Rav Chama, and as we're going to see in a minute, Rav Shmuel and Shmuel, both agree to your tzvara that we will say that you can say that you don't say such a thing. You don't say this taina that I want to live the way my father lived. The Amr of Nachman, the Amr Shmuel, Ha'achin Shecholku, two brothers who divided up Yerusha. Each one took different parts of their property. They don't retain if the father had used a path through one of the two properties. The other one doesn't retain the right to use that right of way as a path. And they can't put in windows. They don't have a right to have their windows not be blocked by light, which is the din that we just said. If one had a property, let's say one had the second floor, and he used to have, the father had a ladder going up, allowing him to access an extra access to the second floor. Once they divide up, that right disappears. It doesn't have a right to irrigate through the other field. And he said, be careful about this because these are very settled law and you shouldn't change it. So you see that when brothers divide up a Yerusha, they don't retain the rights that the father had originally in the part of the Yerusha that they took. And that's why over here we say the brother the brother who got the palace can't say, I'm not letting you put up your wall because I have a right to get light. Rava disagrees with the Nardai. He says, no, the brothers do contain that right. And the Chayra over here, you'd also disagree with Rav Chama. There were Yisayimim that had a star. Yisayimim, the father, Ruvain, the father of Yisayim had a star that said, Shimon owes me money. And the Nafak Tavra. And Shimon had a receipt saying that he had paid back the money that was in the star to Ruvain, to the dead father. Amar Rav Chama, the Yisayimim cannot use the star to be gaiva because Shimon has the receipt saying that he already paid. Even though normally the din is once there's a receipt, we rip up the star. Over here, you don't rip it up. You can't use the star to be gaiva because there's a receipt. But on the other hand, you don't rip up the star. Maybe when the Yisayimim get older, they'll be able to disprove this receipt. The Rishonim explained that this is talking about a case where the father had attempted in the past to collect the debt with the star, and it didn't work out, but there was no receipt given at that time, so there's a reason to think that the star is not on the up and up. What's the halacha? On all these dinim that we brought from Rav Chama, halacha is like Rav Chama lebar bitavra. Except for this last thing that we said that we don't destroy the star. Since there's a tavra, since there's a receipt, we do destroy the star because we have a receipt with edim on it, and we don't assume that the edim are not true. Even in this last in the halacha is Rav Chama, then we said the tavra me'al, if this was a valid receipt, it should have been produced during the life of the father. Like we said, the Rishonim explained that we're talking about where the father tried to collect it. At that point, the tavra should have been produced. When the layafka shmami knows the yuf is there's more of a reason to think over here that it was counterfeit. It wasn't a good. It was a false receipt, and therefore we allow the children, the Yisayimim, to try to disprove it when they get older. So that's the Mishnah. We can force the people in a chutzner to chip in to pay for a beishar. Like we said, a beishar is like that wall that you have outside of the women's swimming pool. They were just arguing about this in Camp Morris. That is, they made the women swim in the boys' day camp, and there was no wall. They didn't have that extra wall outside the door. My daughter was saying, "How could you swim in such a thing? What if someone's walking by?" I said, "I don't know. Until 15 years ago, no one ever heard of such a wall. We grew up. You're lucky there was a mechitza altogether. To have an extra mechitza out at the door, no one ever thought of. But anyway, you can be kaifa to build this extra wall, this extra gatehouse outside of the entrance to the chatzar. Not every chatzar requires this extra gatehouse. We can force the inhabitants of a city to chip in to build the wall and the door, the gate, and briach is like a, a beam to lock the door. Not every city needs a wall. How long does a person have to be in the city to be treated, to be taxed as part of the city? 12 months. But once he owns a house, then you don't need 12 months. It's a renter or someone's in a hotel. He has 12 months before he has to pay the taxes for the chayma. But as soon as you become a landowner, you have to chip in. So remember the Beis Shammai, you see, are we saying that it's a good thing to have this gatehouse outside of the city? There was a chassid, a holy man, that Eliyahu would come in with him. Ovid Beishar, and this man built a gatehouse outside of his chatzar. Eliyahu didn't come because by building this extra gatehouse, he made it that the aniyim would come and knock on the gatehouse, and it was going through both the gatehouse and the door to the chatzar, and nobody heard them. So it was considered like it was a tight on him that he made it hard for aniyim to make their presence known. So it makes a difference if the gatehouse is on the inside. So then the aniyim are locked outside of both the door and the gatehouse. So then it's taka a problem. But if it's on the inside, if it's on the outside, then they can go through the gatehouse and knock on the door. Or you could say both of them are on the outside. And if that's the case, why can't the aniyim walk through the gatehouse? Like kasha hadis leidelis hadeles leidelis. It's talking about when we say it's not a good thing, it's if it has a door on the gatehouse that's not easy to get in. They both have a das. Like kasha hadis le paiseches hadeles leipeseches. Depends if it has a lock. They both have a lock. Like kasha hadepeseches didei megavoy hadepeseches didei mivaroi. Is it a lock that locks it from the inside or from the outside? So if you have a lock that locks it from the outside that people can't get in, then it's a problem that you're keeping the aniyim out. But if the lock is from the inside, and you're thinking, why would you put a lock on the inside? I was thinking maybe it's like a child safety lock that the kids can't get out. So you lock it from the inside, but the aniyim could still get out. That's the only thing I could think of. So we force the inhabitants of the chatzar to contribute toward the gate and toward the door for chatzar. The Mishnah we said, and the Brisa says that not every chatzar needs this gatehouse. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says it depends on whether it's next to Rosh Hashanah that people can look in. That's why you need this gatehouse. So sometimes the Bnei Rosh Hashanah will come in. Even though it's far away from the Shram, you still need it. We forced them to build for the city a wall and door and a gate and a beam to secure the city. But not every city needs a wall. Only the cities that are close to the border, that there are gangs over there it's vulnerable to attack. If it's not near the border, it doesn't need a wall. Sometimes a raw army, a troop will go through, and that's why you need it, even if you're far away from the border. When you take a tax to build a wall, does it go according to how many population? It means if there's 10 people in the house, you have to pay for each person, or do you do it according to income? How much money a person has? That's how much they have to contribute. Which depends. What's the threat? Is the threat that they're going to kill people, or is the threat that they're going to take money? And you do it according to money, because usually what they do is they take money, they don't kill people. And Elazar, my son, you should put the bang in the nail and say this is a final day. Do you assess the tax for the wall to see how close you are to the edge of the city, that you're the more vulnerable to attack, or does it go according to how much money you have? You go according to how close you are to the edge of the city. He said to his son, you should make that the final din. Yehuda put a tax on even on the Rabbanan that they had to contribute to the wall. Rabbanan don't need any watching. That you're going to count them from their number is more than sand. What are we counting? That we're saying it's more than sand. If you're saying that tzaddikim are more than sand, we're saying Yidden themselves are like sand, the amount of the sand. That you can't say tzaddikim are more than the sand. The Masei tzaddikim is more than sand. But if sand, which is less than the maisim toivim tzaddikim, protects from the water from the sea, certainly the maisim tzaddikim are going to be megan alim. Okay, we'll stop over here, even though we're a little bit in the middle, but reached the end of the time.
Tomorrow on Zoom?
Tomorrow on Zoom, 6:30.
Okay.
Yeah.